Greetings in the name of Christ. We thank God for all of you. We bless God for you, and we thank God for all those who are joining us. We are in lesson 3 in living God's way. We're looking tonight verses 18 through 32. It's 4 critical spiritual facts. So we begin our lesson tonight. In spite of the clear revelation of how to live God's way, we live in a world that is rapidly becoming more and more sinful. In our sinful culture, we need to take notice of 4 critical spiritual facts found in Romans 1, verses 18 through 32. Fact 1, God constantly speaks to everyone. Paul begins this passage, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. 2 things versus ungodliness, which means living as if there is no God. This is not necessarily being an atheist. Many people believe in God, but live as though he does not exist. Today, we call this materialism and secularism. The second reason for the revelation of God's wrath is unrighteousness, which is the result of living as if there is no God. Unrighteousness is living without any rules. 6 and 5, wicked people, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. In describing evil people, God's wrath is revealed against godless and wicked people who hold or suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Everyone knows the difference between right and wrong, but we sometimes simply choose to suppress the truth. God has put within each of us a sin detector or conscience, which makes us sensitive to right and wrong. However, we can short circuit our conscience. In Timothy 4 and 2, they describe what happens if we continually violate our consciences, having their conscience seared with a hot iron. The word translated seared is the word from which we get our word cauterize, which means to burn with a hot needle or laser to deaden unwanted tissue. This means we can ignore our conscience and do wrong so many times we lose all sensitivity to sin. We suppress the truth when we stifle our God-given conscience. We live in a country that is trying to suppress the truth about God. In our schools, we've changed the name from Christmas break to winter break. We no longer tell the Christmas story of Christ's birth. Uh, People are suing because they see a nativity scene or they complain. The suppression of the truth, this is all part of the evil one's plan because of the truth found in 1 Timothy 2 and 4. Who will have all men to be saved and to come unto the knowledge of the truth. Paul continues by declaring that the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. The witness of God is unmistakable in creation. The Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. Then what do we read there in Psalms in the next verse? The next verse says, there is no speech nor language where the voice is not heard. In other words, it takes a concerted effort not to see the hand of God and believe in him. People often ask, what about those who have never heard about God? The question is based on false assumptions that they never heard, but they have. Everyone, even those who have never been exposed to God's word, the Bible, are instinctively aware of his existence and his basic standards of righteousness. They have heard in 2 ways, conscience within and creation without. Therefore, they are without excuse when it comes to ungodliness and unrighteousness. God constantly speaks to everyone. That's fact 1. Fact 2 is everyone worships something. Now, Paul explains how people suppress the truth because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. This is evident in the theory of evolution. In spite of their conscience and creation, some people choose to believe we are here by some cosmic accident. When we reject God, we lose the power to discriminate between right and wrong. Then All we can do is try to justify our immoral behavior. That's why Paul makes what declaration in Romans 1 and 22? Professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. The word translated fools, um, moreno, is the Greek word for which we get our word moron. We see this foolishness when, in the name of civil liberty, freedom, and rights, are demanded for obvious sins. And some of these things they argue for freedom of speech and things, but there's a warning from God in Isaiah 5 and 20. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. These fools change the glory of the uncorruptible God into image made like a corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Everyone worships something. So when the one true God is rejected, a substitute must be found. The Bible calls substitute an idol. We don't have idols like ancient civilizations had, but we still have idols. We do idolize money, success, sex, pleasure, fame. Our idols may not be made of wood or stone, but they are idols just the same. Whatever is number one in your life, if it is not God, it is your idol. Fact one constantly speaks to God, constantly speaks to everyone. Fact two, everyone worships something. Fact three, there are consequences to all choices. This awesome passage describes what is called as progressive degeneration or progressive reprobation. First, people turn to God, from God to idols, and the more they abandon God, the more corrupt they become. Paul describes the final step of progressive generation. And when God gives them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves. When we turn from God, we look to at our bodies as things to be used for sensual pleasure rather than used to serve Him. Why is there so much sex on TV? Because there is so little about God and His way. It is clear that Hollywood's chief goal is to promote sexual uncleanness and the dishonoring of bodies to appease sinful lusts. But Hollywood usually doesn't mix the dishonoring of bodies with what truth found in Galatians, and that says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap." This means our choices have consequences. However, some people sow their wild oats and then pray for a crop failure. It takes time to reap what we sow. It's like the man who was standing on top of the Empire State Building and said, "I'm free to do whatever I want, so I'm going to jump." He jumps. And about 20 stories down, someone looks out the window and asks, "How's it going?" He says, "Good so far." Do you know anyone like that? They have sin in their lives, but just haven't hit bottom yet. Someone reading the lesson may be involved in sin, and things seem to be going great because they haven't hit bottom yet. We are free to choose, but we are not free to choose the consequences of our choices. The result is they change the truth of God into a lie and worship and serve the creature more than the creator. What's that lie? That you can disobey God and get away with it. But what eternal principle do we find in Numbers 32 and 23, part B? And it says, "And be sure your sin will find you out." This means there are always consequences for our choices. The consequence of rejecting God's way of living is that all kinds of lusts and sinful desires takes over. Paul writes, "For this cause God gave them up unto vile affection. For even their women did change their natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of women, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet." These acts are against nature because God, because they're against God. A lot of debate, different things, but in terms of Paul writing here, he's saying that in terms of what nature created and what God wanted, that is the way that God meant for it to go. Romans 1:26 and 27, you don't condemn any class of people, but it is, you condemn behavior, sinful behavior. And so in any time with anybody that's in sin, we don't want to go against the person or for any reason. But we do want to speak to the sin. For it is God which worketh in you both will and to do his good pleasure. Greetings. This will be part two to lesson three, um, living God's way. Apologize for the technical difficulties. We were ending on fact number three. There are consequences to all choices. And so we want to finish up our lesson. And in fact, number two, consequences to our choices are such that these choices that we make have consequences. We make choices and there are consequences. So Bible says we reap what we sow. We did end that lesson in speaking about that people can live all kinds of ways and do acts and different things that we do not throw away the person, but we make sure that we love people. We understand Paul writes over in Romans where he talks about the warring going on. And that warring of the members is not a warring just for non-believers, but believers as well. And so we understand that people have these things going on. And we must continue to love, pray for, and lift up individuals. Our final fact, number four, is God can be completely edged out of one's life. When people repeatedly reject God's way, he will give them up to their reprobate mind. They will do things that are not convenient, which means they're not proper and without any restraint or shame. The results of a reprobate mind are the sins cataloged in verses 29 to 31. Unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliceness, envy, murder, debate, deceit, gossip, slander, God-hating, disrespect, arrogance, boasting, inventing evil things, disobedience to parents. Paul concludes the list: without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. The word implacable and unmerciful are generic terms that describe people so depraved they don't care who they hurt to satisfy their sinful desires. Every depraved individual is not necessarily guilty of all these sins, but some of the sins will be prominent. The basic problem with the reprobate mind is pride or ego. And ego can be an acronym for edging God out. In Psalms 10 and 4, the attitude of a prideful and arrogant person, it says, will not seek after God, and God is not in all of their thoughts. Depraved people continue to sin, even though God's judgment is that they which commit such things are worthy of death. The word translated dogma is the word we get our word dogma or dogmatic. It means an opinion expressed with authority. So people with depraved minds continue in sin, knowing God's authoritative judgment, and those who practice such things are worthy of death. Depraved people not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. This means they not only continue in sin, but encourage others to sin. When people reject God's way, they love sin like pigs love slop. They are fools. And Proverbs 21 says, as a dog returning to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. God constantly speaks to everyone. Everyone worships something. There are consequences to all choices, and God can be completely edged out of your life. God bless you. God keep you. Have a smile upon you.